All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the last day at PDC. I hope you guys have had a really good time checking out all the different sessions and hearing all the great announcements that we've made. And I want to thank you for taking the time to attend my session today on the OpenXML SDK. All right, let me tell you how I think about the OpenXML SDK through an analogy. What if I were to tell you that every time you wanted to text message someone, your loved ones, your colleagues, your friends, anyone, you were forced to use your desktop computer? What would you think? Well, it's kind of ridiculous, right? First off, it's really inconvenient. You have to use your desktop to actually text message someone. Second, the most important fact, is you're forced to use a technology that is way too powerful for the task at hand. Essentially, you're using the wrong tool for the job. Now, what if I were to tell you that every time you were to create an Office document solution through automating the Office applications, you're doing just that. We were forcing you to do just that, to use a technology that is way too powerful for the task at hand. Now, if you think about it, if you're automating the Office applications, you have full access to the UI, to everything, including the layout technology and the calculation technology of the applications. Well, my name is Ziad Rajabi, and I'm a program manager in Office. And today I'm going to show you how do you leverage the OpenXML file formats and the OpenXML SDK to create Office document solutions that work on the client and on the server without ever needing to automate Office applications again. Thank you. Some great energy here. All right. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about the SDK in terms of what it is and what it's not. I'm also going to cover a few things in terms of what components make up the SDK and discuss a roadmap of when to expect each of these different components. Throughout this talk, I'm going to show you guys a lot of demos with a lot of code. I'm actually going to put this code up on Channel 9 and on Eric White's blog, and I'll give you guys a link to that blog at the end of the session. I'm also going to cover a few tools that you can use and leverage to help you create Office document solutions faster and easier. But before we get started on all that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about OpenXML file formats. So what we're going to talk about is what actually are the file formats. So OpenXML file formats are the new default file formats of Office 2007. So for Word, we're talking about DocX. For PowerPoint, we're talking about PPTX. For Excel, we're talking about XLSX. And what they are is they are actually zip-based packages. So they're zip files that contain multiple parts. And most of the parts are actually XML. And each of these parts represent certain parts of the file. So for example, you can have a part that represents the main document content. You can have a part that represents the comments. You have another part that represents the charts, the styles, and even media, such as images, video, and sound. OpenXML file formats are actually now an ISO standard, which is also something I want to call out here too. So to show you guys what I mean about OpenXML file formats, what I'm going to do is I'm going to crack open a zip file here and show you guys what I mean. So here I have a sample PowerPoint slide, and it consists of 3 slides here, right? So there's just the title slide, my sample PPTX. The second slide contains an image with some text, and the third slide just contains some additional text. And what I'm going to do is right through the shell, I can rename it into a .zip. And through Windows Shell, I can open up the file. So the big advantage of OpenXML file formats over our old binary file formats is they are transparent. Right? I have full access to the underlying XML that's represented inside this file format. So to differentiate between all the different parts, we have something called contenttypes.xml. And what this file does is it actually lists all the different parts within my file. So in this case, the things I want to point out here is you have a couple of XML things here that say about slide 1 and slide 2. And also something you'll notice here is we have content types associated with this. And the content type here tells you what type of part it is. And in this case, it's just a slide part. So in this case, we have 3 slides. Here are 2 of them. Here's the third one. And then also, if you remember on the second slide, we had an image. And the image is called out as a separate part as well. And in this case, I have a JPEG part. All right, if we go dive a little bit more deeper into this file, you'll notice we have several folders in here. And one folder I want to call out here is the slides. So we have 3 slide parts representing each of the slides within this presentation. So the first slide, if I open this up, contains the XML that represents that particular slide. So if you remember, I had the title of my slide was My Sample PPTX, and I had my name in there as well. Right? So I could actually go ahead and change this XML, save it back out, and open it up in PowerPoint, and it will be persisted in my PowerPoint slide. Also, another thing I want to call is slide 2. Slide 2 had the image. And the way that images work and media work in OpenXML file formats is you have the image contained in a separate part. And what you do is you reference that image within the XML. So in this case, we have an element called pic, and that represents my picture. And to reference it, I have another element called blip that actually references my particular image. And let me show you where this image is actually stored. It's stored in the media folder here. And I can just double-click onto that file. And what you'll see here is the actual image that I had in my second slide. So the key things to note here is that OpenXML file formats are completely transparent. Right? I easily just change it to a .zip, and I see all the XML that represents the file format itself. Secondly, with XML, you can easily manipulate it through, I can use Notepad to manipulate this. I can use whatever my favorite XML editor is to just go edit it and just save it out, and it will persist in the file. So what I'm going to show you today is how we have developed an SDK that is really targeted towards this file format to allow you to easily manipulate and create these OpenXML file formats programmatically. All right, so in the beginning of my talk, I talked about comparing automating Office applications versus using the SDK. And what I'm going to refer to these as the old school way and the new school way. So how many of you guys have actually tried automating the Office applications to create an Office document solution? Right. There's quite a few of you guys. So this little demo here that I'm going to show you is going to be quite familiar to you. So let me just switch over to this machine. All right, so what I'm going to show you guys is a pretty simple solution. And what I have is imagine a scenario where I have a huge document repository. In my case, I have 300 Word documents. And each of these documents, let me open up one, contain a bunch of text and some comments associated with some of the text. And what I want to do is I want to grab the contents of my comments and append them to the bottom of my document. And add some extra metadata inside there that also says who authored the comment and when. So it's a pretty simple scenario here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to do this. Well, I'm going to show you how it works with automating the Office application. So I'm not going to show you the code. I'm just going to show you how it runs and how it looks. So let's go ahead and run this. So for those of you guys who are familiar with automating Office applications, you'll see that Word booted up in this case. It's running through, grabbing all the contents of the comments, and just appending it to the bottom of the document. So you have full access through the automation of the whole entire UI, the entire engine in Word. So that's a lot of power here for this simple scenario. And as you can see, it's taking about a second or so per file. And if I have 300 files here, it's going to take at least 5 minutes to complete. So let me just go ahead and close this guy down before I give somebody epilepsy from just the thing going up and down. All right. Just going to close that guy. Switch back to my slides. All right. So what did we learn from that one? Well, automating Office applications was never really designed for the server, right? If I took this solution and I put it up on the server, I would run into a couple of problems. One, it's not really supported. It's actually not supported. Two, if any dialog popped up during my automation, it would have just killed the automation just in its place, right? And I see some people nodding their heads and in agreement there, right? So if anything just popped up, it would just kill it completely. We've actually heard of customers, and I don't know if some of you guys do this, but we've heard of customers who have a room of servers dedicated to just running Word, for example, that run Office document solutions in them. and they reboot these machines every X hours because of these kind of problems. So what I want to really show you today is how the new school way will just take away this whole need for actually automating Office applications for creating Office document solutions. Another big thing I want to mention here is you notice it took about a second or so to complete each document. So this really doesn't scale if you're talking about documents in the orders of thousands, if tens of thousands. It's going to take, a solution is going to take in the order of hours, if not days, to actually complete. So it's a really long time. It doesn't work on the server. We have a lot of issues. So what I'm going to show you now is the new school way of doing this through leveraging the OpenXML file formats and the OpenXML SDK. Switch over to my machine. Same scenario. And in this case, let me just open up my file repository here. All right, same case. I have 300 documents, and just to open them up to show you. Same deal. Text with comments inside there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run my solution using the OpenXML SDK. And I'm going to show you guys how to code this up in just a few minutes, but I'm just going to show you how this runs and how fast it takes. So I'm just going ahead and running it. Okay, it was taking a second before, but it took 5 seconds here to complete 300 documents. So it's really, really fast. And the key points here that I want to mention is, yeah, again, I'll show you guys how to code this up in just a few minutes. The SDK allows you to have full access to the OpenXML file format. So what I did here is I used the SDK to crack open the files, manipulate the files, and just save it out without ever touching the Office applications. So one thing I want to note here is it's fast. It was really fast. In fact, this solution was running about in a second or so. It just took 5 seconds here because I'm running on my laptop. This solution will work exactly the same way on the client and on the server. So I can take this solution, have it run one way on the client, and expect that solution to work exactly the same way on the server. So it's really, really cool because you can actually take this SDK, and if you guys have developed SharePoint solutions, you can integrate the solution with the SDK and SharePoint to create really rich, robust workflow type solutions or any solution on top of SharePoint. And I'm going to show you guys a couple of really cool SharePoint solutions that I've created with the SDK. Second, you notice I never even touched Office in this case, right? The SDK ran without touching Office. So there's a complete separation of the SDK and automating Office applications. All right, so I showed you guys a solution that worked on the SDK. Now let's talk about what the SDK is. So first and foremost, the SDK is a dedicated file format API dedicated to the OpenXML file formats. It leverages .NET technology. It's actually built off of .NET technology. So that means you can program in your favorite .NET language, in my case, C#. And it's fully compatible with some of the .NET technologies, such as Link. You can actually create solutions that work on the client and on the server and expect them to work exactly the same way. Currently, the SDK supports ECMA 376. So for those of you guys who follow the standards, you'll know that now the OpenXML is part of ISO. And one thing I just want to note is currently the SDK is based on ECMA 376. So we talked about what the SDK is. Let me just really talk briefly about what the SDK is not. The SDK is not a replacement of the object model, right? There is a separation between the SDK and the actual object model itself for the applications. Secondly, the SDK does not include some of the Office code. So it doesn't provide you functionality such as layout functionality. So for example, you can't open up a Word document, query the document, and figure out exactly how many pages it is. I mean, you can write code to do that, but the SDK is not going to do that for you. It doesn't have a layout engine associated with it. Secondly, it doesn't have a recalculation engine. So if you have an Excel spreadsheet that has a bunch of formulas in it, it's not going to recalculate those formulas for you. What you're going to need to do is you can probably write code to actually recalculate it for yourself. And third, the SDK currently does not provide conversion functionality to and from different file formats. So for example, you can't take a PPTX and convert that to a PDF or to HTML, for example. So we're releasing this SDK in 2 versions. Version 1 is all about part-level manipulation and creating the package. And version 2 is all about going a little bit deeper and providing functionality to manipulate some of the content and the underlying XML. And here's a bit of a roadmap that we have. So V1 was finally released back in June 2008 with the go-live bits. The final bits are out. You can go on MSDN right now and download it for free. You can create solutions on V1, deploy the solutions freely. V2, we just released the first CTP last month. And we have a couple more CTPs to go, and we're actually pegging the release of the SDK at the same time as 14 ships, Office 14. All right, so we built the SDK in a layered approach. The first layer that we call is the system support layer. And this is the system support layer is basically the layer that we built our technology off of. So as I mentioned before, we built off of .NET. In our case, we've built off of .NET 3.5 to leverage some of the link technology. We've built off of system.io.packaging to allow us to create packages, to unzip the files, and to manipulate the parts. And of course, we've built off of the OpenXML schemas. So the schemas represent our file formats. And we've built off of those schemas to provide you the format base level layer, which is the second layer. The second layer that we have up here is the foundation of the OpenXML file format SDK. It provides you a bunch of functionality to create the packages, to manipulate the packages, to read the contents, and to write the contents. So both at the part and XML levels. The last layer that I have up here, the third layer, called the higher level layer, is still in its thinking process. And this layer, I think, is all about helping you, the developer, more easily create solutions on top of OpenXML. So let's dive a little bit more deeply into some of these layers. So the base level layer, like I mentioned before, is really the foundation of the SDK. It provides you strongly typed access to all the parts and the packages. So you have strongly typed access to, like, what I showed you is the comments part, or the image part, or the main document part. It also provides strongly typed access to the underlying XML. So for each XML element in your file, you have an object representing that particular element. So for example, if you have a paragraph elements, you'll have a paragraph object. So there is a one-to-one mapping of the XML element to the object itself. And lastly, we provide SAX-like and DOM-like reading and writing capabilities. So V1 of the SDK just provided the packaging API layer component. V2, at least from the first CTP, provides this entire layer. So V2 is a lot more rich than V1 at this point. All right. The last layer that I have here is blue slide because it's still future think and we're still thinking about it. And if you guys have some suggestions around this, I'd love to hear your suggestions maybe at the end of the session. But really, we want to use this layer as a way to help developers create OpenXML file format solutions. So what we're thinking of providing is whenever you're manipulating XML, you need to make sure that it's compliant according to the schema. Or in our case, in addition to the schema, is also semantic level validation. So semantic level validation, if you look at the standard, there's a bunch of pros inside the standard that cannot be represented through the language of XSD, the schema language. So instead, what we're thinking of doing is providing semantic level validation logic within the SDK to help you create valid files. And then our last component that I have up here is providing a way to give you helper functions or helper methods to help you more easily do certain things that are a little complicated. For example, inserting files or inserting content within from one document to another document, for example. All right, so I talked about the architecture. Now let's actually show you how actually to code with the SDK. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to code up the new school demo that I showed you, where I took documents that had content and comments, and I want to append the comment contents to the bottom of the document. So the first thing I'm going to do is I created a solution. And what I did is I just created one document that just represented the same type of document I had before. So it's just basically comments on top of content. And in order for me to develop a solution, I need to just really quickly take a look at the underlying XML to see how the XML is represented so I can figure out how to create the solution. So what I'm going to do is let me just take a copy of this. All right, I'm going to open this up straight into Visual Studio. So right now I'm using a tool called VSTO Power Tools. It's a free tool available as a download. I'll give you guys a link to this in the tool section. But this allows me to open up open XML file formats directly in Visual Studio. So what I have here is I have full access. It's cracked open the zip file. And the two parts that I really want you to pay attention to are the document part. And I'll open this guy up. This is the main document part. And what this does is it contains the text. So in this case, here's all the text. It contains the comment ranges, so where they start and where they end. And it also contains the reference to the comment. So in this case, it's referencing comment with ID 0. So I'm going to go back and open up my comments. So as I mentioned to you before, the comments content is contained in the comments part. So let me show you this. So in this case, we have a comments element. And each of this comments is the root element of this part. And it contains a bunch of comment elements that represent each of the comments within my document. And within each of the comments nodes, I have the text that represents each of the contents of the comment. So what I need to do is I need to take the content here and append it into my main document part. Right? And that's what I'm going to show you how to do. So let me just close these guys down. All right. And what I have, before I get into this, is the first thing I do is download the OpenXML SDK. Once I download that, I can reference that very easily in my project. In this case, it's the document format.openxml DLL. And then the next thing I need to do is just add my namespaces, my references to the SDK itself. So in my case, I know I'm dealing with a word processing document. So I've included using document format.openxml.word processing. And then I also need to manipulate and get access to the different packages and the parts within my file. So I've just created a skeleton file here, a skeleton CS file here. And what I have here is I'm just taking my demo docx that I showed you. I'm just copying that onto an output docx, which is where I'm going to have my manipulated file. So the first thing I need to do, like I said, is open up the Word document. And the way they do this is in the SDK is I'll just go ahead and have, okay. So what I'm doing right here is I have a strongly typed access to the word processing document. So I'll just go ahead and open this guy up. So just like that, I've just opened up the zip package, right? So now I've just completely opened up the word processing document, and now I have access to all the parts. So the two parts I need to get access to at this point are the main document part and the comments part. So the first thing I need to do before I get the comments part is get the main document part, which has all the references to all the other parts within my document. So to get the main document part, I have, again, strongly typed access to each of the parts. And I will go ahead. And just like that, I just have access to the main document part. And currently what I'm using is this is just V1 technology. This is all available right now with V1. And again, I'm going to use V1 technology, the packaging API, to get access to the comments part. And the way to get comments part is to go through the main document part. So let me just go ahead and do word process comments part. And then through the comments part, I have to get access to the comments part from my main part. So from my main part, I have strongly typed access to the word processing comments part. So right there, I have access to right now I have access to my comments part and to my main document part. Now what I need to do is for each comment in my comments part, I'm going to create two paragraphs in my main document part. The first paragraph is going to contain my metadata, so who authored the comment, when did they author it, and my second paragraph is going to contain the contents of my comment. So the way to do that is just like what I said, for each comment in my comments part, and now I'm using V2 by the way. So for each comment in my comments part, I'm going to create two paragraphs. So the first paragraph I'm going to create is I'm going to actually use functional programming. So for those of you guys familiar with functional programming, I'm just going to use functional programming to easily create the node that represents my paragraph. So I'm going to create a paragraph, and under my paragraph, it's going to be a new paragraph. And under my paragraph is going to be a run. So in a word processing document, you have a paragraph. Each paragraph has a run, and each run has a text. And in my case, I'm going to create a new run. And because I want to differentiate between my metadata content and my actual content, I'm going to actually apply a style to my first paragraph. And the way to do that is I'm going to apply a run style that's called intense reference. So it's just a character style that I can apply to this first paragraph. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new run properties. And under this new run properties, I'm going to create a new run style. All right. And this guy is going to use the intense reference style. So at this point, I've just created my run properties. And as a symboling to run properties is I'm going to create my new text node. And in my text, I'm going to add the contents of my comments. So the first thing I'm going to do is say comment author at a certain date. So the way to do that is I have strongly typed access to each of the objects. So I have an object now, the comment object, and I can just get the author. Say at, and get the date. Close that guy down. And there we go. We have the first paragraph. The first paragraph contains the metadata content. Now I need to create a second paragraph. In this case, I'm not going to use functional programming. I'm just going to use regular programming here. So let's go and create a new paragraph. And this guy is going to contain a new run. And then a new text. And then I need to get the contents of my comment. So to do that, I just have the inner text. So right now, I need to just append my objects together to make sure that I have the XML tree appropriately set. So in this case, I know my run is going to contain my text, and my paragraph is going to contain my run. All right, so now I've just created two paragraphs. Now all I need to do is take those paragraph nodes and just append them into my main document part, and then save everything out and close it down, and everything should work. So let me go ahead and append this to my main part. So I have my main part. And I know I'm going to have to append it underneath my body element. So I have my document, then body, and then append here. And I can just append my two paragraphs. All right. And I do this for each comment inside my comments part. And then my last step is to just save everything out. So then I just go ahead and save my document. And there we go, and everything should work. And there it is. So that solution, if I go into, there it is, output.docx, and I want to open this guy up. Here it is. And just to show you that I'm using the intense reference, is you see I'm hovering over the content here. And as you can see, it's using my intense reference style. So it's just that easy to actually add and append styles to my document. All right, so let me close that guy down. All right, so what did we learn from this demo? Well, it's really easy to search for specific content, right? I used a simple query here to get all the comments within my document. It's really easy to get access to the different parts and to each of the XML elements as objects with using the SDK. And I don't know if you noticed this, but with IntelliSense, it's really, really easy to just quickly write your code and just manipulate the file format, just like that. And again, it was really fast, right? My solution just didn't take me that long to write, just to do this easy scenario. All right, so that was a pretty simple scenario. Let me actually show you something that's really cool now. So what I'm going to create here, and this scenario is all about creating a reporting presentation slide or deck. And what I'm going to do is let's say I work for a company called AdventureWorks. I'm sure you guys have heard AdventureWorks is our fictitious company that specializes in bicycle parts and bicycles. And what I want to do is I want to create a report based on all my salespeople. So for each salesperson I have in my company, I want to create a deck that actually contains, A, who are my salespeople, how much money they've made, give me their contact info, their name, their email. And for each salesperson, I'm going to create a slide in my deck. And then by the end of this, I'm just going to have a deck that contains all my salespeople. So it's just a reporting app just based on this particular data. So the way that I have this set up is, let me go ahead and I created a template just to show you what this is going to look like. So I have a template here. It just contains 2 slides. The second slide is really the important slide here. The second slide is a template slide that I've created that contains the placeholder content of where I want to put the data from my database into PowerPoint. Right? So I want to have the name, the full name of the salesperson. I want to have their email address, what territory they own, how much sales they've made. And over here to the right, I have a picture, a placeholder picture where I'm going to put a picture of them in this deck. So at the end of this, I'm going to have a full presentation of all data from my database. So let me go ahead. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to run this, and then I will walk through the code. So I'm going to run this code. So right now it's connecting to my database, grabbing the content from my database, and then just putting it all into my deck. So here it is. It just created an output.pptx. And when I open this guy up, I have about 15 slides right now. Right? So here it is. So the first slide, first guy that I have is Michael Blythe. He owns a territory in the Northeast, and there's his image. Right? And for each person in my database, I'm pulling out the data from my database and putting it as a slide. So that took only a second, and I created a whole reporting app out of PowerPoint with using the SDK. So let me just go ahead and show you guys the code, how this works. I'm going to put a breakpoint, and we'll just walk through it. All right. So the first step is I'm just copying my template document into my output document. And then, like I showed you before with the word processing document, I have a strongly typed access to the presentation document. So I'm opening up a presentation slide or deck right here using the SDK. So at this point, I've opened up the PowerPoint deck. And now, like in the case of the word processing document, I need to go grab all the references to all the different parts. So in my case, I need to go grab the presentation part. And I know, since I created this file, my slide template I can get the slide template through a relationship. So like I said before, all the parts are referenced through relationships. And in this case, I know that the relationship with an ID 3 references my template for that particular slide. So right now, I've just accessed my main template slide. So what I'm going to need to do is at this point connect to my database, and for each row that in my query for my SQL database, I'm going to clone up the slide and then swap out the placeholder content with that content, and keep repeating that until I reach the end. So with this point, I just connect to my AdventureWorks. I'm just going to skip this one too. This is my query to get all my salesperson information. Okay, just keep skipping through this stuff. So for each item in my database, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out all the necessary information. So I'm grabbing the first name, the last name. This is just simple SQL queries. All right. Okay. Now this is where I do the SDK stuff. So I'm actually going to clone the template slide. And what I've done here is I wrote a little method. And this method, the way this is going to work, is I'm going to clone a slide. I'm going to create a new slide, grab the content of my template slide, stream it into my created slide, and then just swap out my text, right? So in this case, I'm going to add a new slide. So I'm adding a new part. That's a slide. And then I'm going to feed my data from my template slide into my created slide here. So in that case, I just feed it all in. All right. And, whoops, I just skipped that one. But this line right here will actually then, as soon as I feed that all in, I will go ahead and add that particular slide back into my deck. And the way for me to do that is I need to go figure out where the last slide was, get the reference to the last slide, and just append it right after it. So the way for me to do that is query the entire list of slides in my deck, find out the last reference. It's just like appending to some linked list, right? So I just go in there, and then for each slide, I'm just getting the maximum slide ID. I'm just going to skip that stuff. So once I've grabbed the maximum slide ID, I have the pointer to where I need to go insert my new slide that I've created. And right there, I will just go ahead and insert the slide right after. So again, we have the functionality built in right into the SDK where I can insert my new slide right after the previous slide. So in this case, I'm just inserting it right after. And then the last step I need to do is make sure that I have all the references set up properly. So what I'm doing here is with the new slide, I'm just making sure that I've set up all the references. So I've figured out where the max slide ID is, and just making sure that my presentation is going to be correct. So at that point, I've just added the new slide to my presentation. And now what I need to do is I need to swap the data. So I know that each of my slides here, I have an image representing the contact person for each of my salespeople. So what I need to do is, what I showed you before, is each image is its own part. So again, I'm going to have to, for each person in my database, I'm going to add a new image part. So in this case, again, I strongly typed access to add an image part. And then I'm going to take my image from my database and feed it into my image of my new image part that I just added. So again, just calling out the SDK to just feed the data directly in. And then at this point now, I just need to swap out my placeholder text, right? So I created a method here that just swaps it out. And the way that I did this is I'm using link to do this. So what I'm doing is, in my slide, I'm grabbing all the text nodes within my slide. And for each text node that has text equal to my placeholder, I'm going to swap it out with the appropriate text. So skip that. All right. Now that I've found my text, I will then go ahead and swap it out. So for each placeholder that I found, I'm going to take the text of the placeholder and just swap it out directly with the value from my database. Right? So in this case, I'm just saying for each text that I found for my link query, I will go ahead and then swap out the text. So text, and just doing a simple swap out here. So skip all that guy. All right. So I don't want to repeat it again for each person. Let me just go down, add another breakpoint. So the next thing I want to show is get to the swap photo guy. So for the swap photo guy, what I'm going to do here is, when I cracked open the PowerPoint slide in the beginning, you notice that the slide that I had the second slide that I had in my sample presentation had an image, and the image was referenced with a certain ID. So for me to actually swap out the image, what I need to do is, what I have done is created the image from my database, and now I just need to reference it appropriately, right? Just swap out the reference from the placeholder image that I had to that new image. And the way that I did that is, again, is a simple link query again, which is basically finding all the locations where I had the blip element. And I find my first one, since I have only one image. And then after that, I just swap out the image ID. So I'm just taking the embed reference ID and swapping out with the new reference ID that I've just created for my particular image. And then I save out my slide, and I go ahead and delete my template slide, and then I save out my presentation, and then that's it. At that point, I've just created my new presentation. All right, so what did we learn from this one? So this one, again, when I ran this in the beginning, it took only a couple of seconds to actually run, query the database, swap out all the text. I never touched the PowerPoint object model to do this. I started from a template, so what I could have done in this case is I could have just modified my template in terms of how it looks in any way I wanted and rerun it again, and it would have run the same, because all I'm doing is just looking at the XML and not the layout of the actual document itself. I've used link queries to query into my XML. So we fully integrated link within the SDK itself. And as you notice, I've used strongly typed access to get each of the objects and the parts themselves. So the next demo that I want to show you guys is another scenario with AdventureWorks. And what I have here is I have content from my database that I want to create a report within Excel that grabs the data from my database, adds it into one sheet, and then I want to actually have a chart to represent that particular data. So the way for me to do this, let me close this guy, is again, I'm going to start with a template. And in my case, I've just created an empty template spreadsheet that contains two sheets. So the first sheet just is going to contain just the placeholder regions of where I want the content, right? So I'm going to have the territory name, the sales, and then what I have is I have a chart the way that I want it to look that's going to reference the data within my first sheet. So right now everything is empty, and what I need to do with the SDK is connect to the database, stream in all the data from my database, add it to my first sheet, and then manipulate the chart to make it work appropriately. So what I'm going to do here is first I'm going to run it to show you guys how this works, and then we'll go dive into the code. So yeah, this took, again, less than a second. And what I've done here is I've created, with the SDK, an entire chart based off of my data, and in my first sheet is all the data that I pulled out from my database, from my AdventureWorks database. And the way for me to do this is, let me actually show you how to do this through using an actual OpenXML tool that we have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy up the template, and the first thing I'm going to do is actually show you how to do this in Excel. I mean, you guys may already know this, right? So I'm just going to add simple data in here. I'm going to modify the chart to reference that particular data. Right? Save this guy out. So now I have my template document here and my newly created document. And now what I want to do is I want to actually check out the differences between these two in terms of XML so I can figure out how to code this. So we have a tool that's called the OpenXML diff tool. And what this tool does, and actually ships with the SDK, it's a free tool, is it allows me to compare two OpenXML file formats and tell me the differences. So in my case, I'm going to compare the template document with my copied document. Open this up. And what this shows me is, on the left here, I have a package view of all the parts. And on the right, I have the two files in terms of the comparison. So in this case, I know there's two parts that I really want to pay attention to. The first part is the actual sheet, the first sheet with the data. And to show me the differences is you'll notice right here in blue, in my document that I've actually manipulated through Excel, is it added a couple of rows, right? It added this new row here with extra data. So it added 2 rows to my document. All right? So what I need to do to manipulate this through the SDK is actually do the same thing. Just create new rows based on the data from my database. The second sheet that I want to show is the chart sheet. And this one got modified as well. And the thing that I want to call out really is just these 2 lines. So the only difference that I have in the chart sheet is the range of where it's pulling out my data. So in the template, it was just getting it up to B2. In my second, the document that I created in Excel, it's pulling it up from B2 all the way to C2, since I added just 2 rows. So what I'm going to do here is show you how to code this up. Well, show you the code and then walk through it, actually. So again, let's put a breakpoint, just run this. 1 sec, sorry. All right. So again, what I do is I copied my template file to my generated file and open up my spreadsheet document. Again, strongly type access to my spreadsheet document. Get access to the main workbook part, which gives me references to all the parts within my file. Grab the first worksheet, and then grab the sheet data that basically is where I need to insert my new rows. So I'm using a link query right here to get the first child within my part that is the sheet data. So the sheet data has all the rows for my table. Again, connect to database, have a simple query there. And then for each item in my database, pull out the territory name, pull out the sales information. And then here is where I actually create my row. So the first step was creating a new row, right? So in this case, I created a method here that says create row. And I'm just creating a row using the objects within the SDK. So a new row, the row has a certain index to it. I'm gonna go ahead and create a cell to the first row. And the way to create my cells is I create a new cell object with the values and append the values inside my cells and append the cells to the row and return the row, right? So I'm going to do that for all my rows. I'm just going to skip that particular part. All right. So now, right at this point, I've just added up a whole bunch of rows to my document. The next thing I need to do, so just append that in there. And let me put another breakpoint. The next thing I need to do is fix up my chart data, right? So the way to do that, as you saw, is I just had to fix up the ranges. So my first range was up to B2, and my second document that I had was up to the end of my last row in my document. So in this case, I'm using a linker query again to go grab my first chart part. Actually, I'm using the, this is this V1, getting the chart part. And then and this is where I'm using the link query. For each of my formulas that I found in my chart part, I'm going to go ahead and modify the range to extend it to the end of my rows, right? So I've already calculated what my last row was. So I'm changing it from whatever it was, B2, all the way to BN, whatever my BN is in terms of the last one. So I'm just getting the last count. So right here, I'm just extending it. And then I just save out the chart. And at that point, I've just modified my document, right? So I've done two things in this case. I've added the rows to my first chart, to my first sheet, and then I've extended the chart to the range of the data for my first sheet. All right. So from this case, it's always easier to start from a template. So I've started from a template and created within Excel. And I've used the SDK to easily get access to each of the different parts and add content to my document. And this is all using the SDK without even touching the Excel object model as well. All right, how many of you guys have actually tried to do document assembly where you're trying to merge documents together? All right, so let me show you how to do this with the SDK and the OpenXML file formats in a really easy way. So the scenario that I have here is I've actually created a SharePoint solution where my scenario is I want to create a document about the solar system. So in my document on the solar system, there's content there that talks about all the different planets, the sun, and all this other stuff about the solar system. And what I want to do is for each component of my solar system, like for each planet, I want to have a different author that particular document. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all those documents and merge them up together. So I've created two document libraries. The first document library contains my template document. And this is going to be just representing this main structure of the final document that I have. So in this case, I have the solar system. And what I have here is I have placeholder regions within my document that tell me I want to insert particular files in this, the content from those particular files in this particular area. So what I'm using here is a feature within Word, Processing ML in Word, called content controls. And the content controls allow me to add structure to my document. Right? In this case, I have a structured location here for where I want to insert a document about the sun. Similarly, here's another location within my document that is all about inserting content for Mercury and Venus and so forth. And what I have here is I have another document library that contains all the source files for this file, this end file. So you can imagine I authored Jupiter, so I can go take a look at that. And this file contains a lot of rich content. It contains images, content, track changes, and some of these documents even contain comments. And similarly, the same is true for the rest of these documents. And what I want to do is I want to take all these source files and merge them in those particular areas that I showed you in the template file. So what I have here, and I'm going to show you guys the code, is I've created a custom action within SharePoint called assemble OpenXML documents. And what this is it's leveraging the OpenXML SDK to open up each of these files and then merge all the contents together into my final document. So create a new document. In this case, it's going to be called solar system-new. I'm going to go ahead and assemble it. And it assembled it in less than a second. I mean, this is really, really fast. And here's the end result document. So when I open it, it actually takes longer to open it up in Word. And to just show you all the content that's in there, show you the document map. And remember, this is using the template file that I had before that had no content. It just had the structured regions. And in this case, I have now all of the content that I had from my other library inserted directly into this particular file with all the rich content, with all the images, with all the comments, with all the track changes. So the fidelity is all there. And this is all using just the SDK just to do the assembly. So let me show you guys what this code looks like. And I'm going to show you the code here to take away outside of SharePoint, just to abstract the SharePoint aspects in here. And all I'm doing in this case is I'm leveraging a technology called all chunks within word processing documents. So there's something called all chunks that Word and word processing documents understand, where you can insert other documents that can be of Word document types or even HTML. So you can take other files, embed them inside the file, reference them as all chunks, and they will all get merged together as soon as it's opened in Word. So in this case, I'm just going to put a breakpoint here and just start from here, is, again, open up my document, grab the main document part, and I have a link query. And my link query here is going to say, go find all my semantic structure that I've added to my template through content controls. In this case, it's called SDT block in the XML. And I'm going to find everywhere where my alias of my content control, so basically the name, matches the name in my file repository, right? My other document library. So for each guy that I find, what I'm going to do is I'm going to embed the document for the source file as an all chunk. So what I do here is, again, I add a new part called the alternative format chunk. I'm going to go feed the data from my source document into my my all chunk. And then what I do is, now I've added I've embedded now the file. Now what I need to do is swap out my content controls content and with the reference to the all chunk itself. So in this case, I've created an all chunk element, and I have an ID that references the embedded object, right? So I've already created my all chunk from this statement up here, and here's the ID for the all chunk. So all I'm doing is just referencing the same ID within the XML. So then for each content control that I have that references that particular content, what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap out the content control with the all chunk reference. So what I'm doing is I'm finding each content control within my XML, grabbing its parent, I'm inserting the all chunk reference right after, and then I'm going to delete, then I remove the content control. So it's just basic swapping of the content control with the all chunk. And at that point, I just save it. And this code is only 100 lines of code for me to actually do a merging of Word documents. And it's actually pretty simple to actually use the SDK on this particular case. So what did we learn from this guy? So in this case, the easiest way to do document assembly with word processing documents is to use all chunks. It's a very easy way to merge other Word documents into the main document, as well as other document format types like HTML. With the SDK, you can easily do structured search, right? So I use link queries to actually find the particular regions within my XML that I wanted to manipulate. So in this case, I used my link query to find all the content controls within my document. The next thing I did is I easily swapped out my content controls with other content. So in this case, I used all chunks as an embedding source file instead of the content control itself. And I've integrated this solution within SharePoint. I'm going to provide you guys the code up on Channel 9 on Eric White's blog as well for both of these types of solutions, for the SharePoint one and the one I just showed. All right, so we have a bunch of tools that will help you create these OpenXML solutions. So the tools that I really want to call out here, and I showed you a couple of them. I showed you the OpenXML diff tool, and the diff tool allows you to tell the differences between the documents. And another tool that we have is we have a tool called the document reflector. And the document reflector tool basically allows me to open up any OpenXML document and automatically generate the code representing it. So I just open up a sample document, and let me just actually open it up to show you guys. It's just a simple document with a table in it. And what I have in here is it uses reflection to actually grab all of the content within my OpenXML and generate the code. So in this case, here's all the code that you can use, and you can just copy it straight into a solution and generate this particular file. If you don't want to generate the entire file, you can actually go pick particular nodes within the file. So in this particular case, let's say I wanted to go grab the table and generate the table content. So here's the XML. And you can just copy all this content, and that's how you actually can just easily reuse the content, the code in here to create your solutions. The next tool that we have is called the Class Explorer. And this is an easy way for you to explore the SDK with respect to the standard itself. So right now it's tied to ECMA, the ECMA standard. And let's say, for example, I wanted to learn more about word processing documents. So in my case, let's say I want to learn more about comments. So here's the standard and what it says about comments. And what I can do is, in a separate tab, is show you the object representing comments and all the methods associated with it. So it's a really easy way to actually explore the SDK as it maps to the standard itself. The next tool that we have is we have a set of tools under OpenXML Power Tools that work within PowerShell. And for those of you guys who are not familiar with PowerShell, PowerShell allows you to run a bunch of commandlets together, commandlets being sort of like black boxes that has objects coming in and objects coming out. And in our case, we have OpenXML commandlets that do certain functionalities, like remove comments, accept track changes, add a watermark or create charts. And what we did is we provided these power tools as an open source project on CodePlex, and you can actually go and download them. And what I'm going to show you real quick is actually how to use the OpenXML power tools. So let me go ahead and switch back up to here. So what I have here is I have a commandlet that's going to run the following script. It's going to run a script that's going to go grab all my processes running in my computer. It's going to grab the CPU usage, and then here's the commandlets for the OpenXML. So what it's going to do is it's going to create an OpenXML spreadsheet. It's going to create a chart. It's going to create a bar chart, and it's going to add the content, add the data from my process into my document, and then save it out as a proc summary.xlsx. So in this case, I'm just going to run the script real quick. So here I have the script, and I'm just going to just run it. And then so it just ran in less than a second. And here is my resulting file. So it's exactly the same scenario that I showed you guys before with creating a spreadsheet. But in this case, I just used it all with Power Tools, and I created a document from scratch. So here's all my processes running on my computer right now. And here's a chart representing all my processes. So you can imagine this scenario here where you can run this script across your entire network and get all the data based on all the computers within your network itself. So it's a really easy, quick way to actually use the power tools to accomplish certain functionality. So as I mentioned, we have a whole bunch of commandlets available on CodePlex. These are all open source. You can go ahead and grab them right now and use them freely. It's all built on top of V1, actually. We're going to migrate it all to V2, but it's all using V1, and you can actually create a bunch of rich solutions with just using these power tools. The other tool that I have, or that we have, is the VSTO power tools that I showed you earlier. This tool allows you to open up and manipulate OpenXML file formats directly in Visual Studio. And it's just a link here to where to get this tool and download it. Yep. Yes, I have a slide with all the URLs. Okay, and the next thing I want to mention is I have way more demos, but I just didn't have enough time to show you guys all the demos. And there's actually one more demo that I really want to show you real quick. I'm not going to show you the code for. I just want to prove of concept. Is again, I created a SharePoint solution in the same exact library that's going to do. It's going to work exactly the same way as the document inspector within Office 2007. So imagine the scenario where you have a document. In this case, let's open up a particular document that has a bunch of track changes and comments. And also, in addition to that, it has personal information, like who authored this. In this case, it was, and who authored it. So it has the personal information. So what I want to do is I create a solution using the SDK that is again, a custom action that allows me to go ahead and just easily go ahead and remove all of this content. So in this case, I just went ahead and removed all the comments, all the revisions, and all the personal information. So now when I go open up this document again, everything is removed, right? So it's all gone using the SDK and leveraging the OpenXML file formats. All right. And as promised, here are all the links to the information. So we're going to provide all of these the code samples on Eric White's blog, which is the first link up there. There are several other blogs that you can get other information on OpenXML file formats and the OpenXML SDK. MSDN is your place to get extra information and more how-to articles and help on how to actually create these OpenXML file formats. We have a Connect site that you guys can join to sort of extra forums and extra content and extra articles to read up on. We have Codeplex, which has a bunch of open source projects on the OpenXML SDK. And there's a couple of download sites here for version 1 and version 2 of the SDK. All right. And I want to leave some time here for questions and answers. So either you can ask a question or just say, I want to be a lobster, and I'll launch one of these things at you guys. Yep.
One quick question. We do a lot of manipulation with PowerPoint. And one of the challenges we run into is if somebody has protected the PowerPoint with a password, you encrypt the document content then, correct?
Right. So the question is, when a PowerPoint is encrypted, yes.
Is there a way to test that without, because it's encrypted data, how do you know it's encrypted?
Right. So the question is, how do you test to see if a PowerPoint deck is encrypted or not? Right. There is a way you can do that with the SDK and as well as with the system.io.packaging to check to see if there's encryption on the file. Yes.
Super. Thank you.
And here's sorry, these things don't launch too well. There you go. Yep. Yes.
Okay. I realize this isn't within the domain of this topic, but I don't know who else to ask. I've done a lot of work with XPS, and I've noticed that the system window documents APIs exposed in WPF aren't really as robust and might potentially have some leaks within them. Who should I talk to? I'm only asking because it's under the domain of OPC.
Right. So the question is, who do you talk to about certain issues with system.io.packaging? Is that what you said?
System Windows documents, actually.
System Windows documents. Yeah, my recommendation to that would be there's a couple places. You can go probably to a team blog that they have and report it there, or you can report it through Microsoft Help channels. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, these things do not launch appropriately. Can you just, Eric can pass over a bunch. Any other questions? Yes? No? You just want hats? Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the question is, for those people who didn't hear, is the object model in the applications really abstract away in terms of really handling some of the objects like tables, and you have full access to that, whereas the API is really about the file format and tied in directly to XML. So my answer to that is yeah, we're looking into that. It's part of what I consider the higher level layer there in terms of like the helper functionality. Mm-hmm. No, totally, yeah, totally understand. Right. Yes?
IRM and certificates, are they in V2?
IRM and certificates, are they in V2? So the certificates are part of the system.io.packaging, and you have full access to that currently. Yeah. Yeah. He was waiting, sorry.
A suggestion and another a question. Like that if and how did it happen? Thank you. If the Office automation object model can support the XML format underneath it, like for example, all the applications out there or the programs out there who actually currently use the application model of Office automation application model can so if you implement something underneath that which actually works on top of OpenXML and not an object model, probably those programs will actually very easily migrate to OpenXML. That's one. And another one is question would be like instead of replacing a placeholder inside an XML buried inside the OpenXML format, if I put my own custom XML into the docx and let it live wherever it lives and just replace those information out there and not worry about the OpenXML schema so that I get abstraction from the schema changes if that happened to be, and at the same time leverage the OpenXML in a way that I understand it better in my XML terms.
So let me repeat the first question. The first question was around the differences between the object model within the applications versus the SDK and how those things map together, correct?
No, actually what I was saying was like all the programs out there who actually uses the automation, the Office object model today, can an implementation be done underneath object model of Office with the same interfaces exposed out, but working on the XML?
So the answer to that is, well, the question is, how does the object model actually work? So the answer to that is the object model does not work on the file format. It actually works on the in-memory representation. Right. So as soon as you open up a document, it could be binary file or the docx, it's represented in memory within the application. So the object model is actually working directly on top of that. So it abstracts away and doesn't have actual knowledge of the underlying file format, whereas the SDK is actually touching the file format. Right.
So is there any way, like, if we can have an implementation on SDK, the XML SDK, but supporting the interfaces of object model?
Well, okay. So so the question there is, is there a way to actually have the SDK more closely mapped to the object model? And my answer to that is that's something that we're definitely looking into. At this point, it's really just a file format API, right? It's separated. And I know you had a second question. So the second question was around how do you access custom XML within the OpenXML file format. So custom XML can be directly accessed using the V2 of the SDK, just using it as through objects as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
If you already have an open Word document, can you get access using the SDK without having to open it from the SDK? Meaning that you have it open, you're hooked into the Word APIs.
Right. So the question is, if you have a Word document open up in Word, can you access that particular file to manipulate it? So what happens is when you open up a file within Word, Word will take a lock on the file. Unless you copy it out to another location or another file, you won't have access to directly write into it. You have read access, you don't have write access. So I have one of these. It's not gonna. You already have one?
That's fine. You can throw me another.
It doesn't launch. Sorry, these things are not frisbees. Any other questions?
Yes. Is there any time frame for the release of the new ISO specification of the format?
Yeah, so the question is there a time frame for the release of the ISO? I'm not exactly sure when the time frame is going to be, but hopefully soon.
And when the release is going to the market, the SDK will be fitted for the release?
So the question after that is, as soon as the ISO is made public, how soon will it be integrated into the
With the
SDK?
SDK.
It's hard to tell at this point. It really depends on when the ISO standard becomes public and how that will actually map into the SDK. But like I said before, we're actually releasing multiple CTPs, so there is an opportunity there.
Thanks.
Yes? Yep.
Does it maintain the individual page is being versioned the page like that? So, you know, page 1 to 5, page 1 to 5.
So you're saying if the alt chunks, if the chunks that you want to insert into the file have their own paging mechanism, how do you maintain that?
Does it actually keep those?
Yeah, and the question is, how does it keep those intact? Well, you can do a couple of things to keep those intact, right? Within a word processing document, you can actually break it up into sections and try to do that. But all chunks are not going to accomplish that directly because it's going to try to insert everything into the same section. Yes?
Is there a general technique for dealing with the macro recalculation? So for instance, if you're trying to work out the number of pages you've got in your document that you use,
Mm-hmm.
if you need to build to recalculate, or even in Excel, a common pattern is to launch Excel, spit some data into it,
Mm-hmm.
have it recalculate into a chart, but then using an automation again to go and grab the chart as bitmap and stick it somewhere else.
That's a great question. So the question is, the SDK is limited in the fact that it can't accomplish layout and recalculation functionality. How do you work around that? So with respect to Excel, Excel has an Excel services that you can go ahead and manipulate the file with the SDK, send it over to Excel services to do the recalculation for you, bring it back with the SDK and do extra manipulations. So it's sort of, you can make them work together to accomplish that scenario. Right? Yes? Yes, actually, so the question is there a way to convert docx to docm or vice versa? Yes, there's absolutely a way to do that, even using v1, to manipulate and convert within the same format type. Well, there's like .create and or .save as, yeah. You save it as, it changes it up. Yeah.
Do you always have to do a save, or can you just stream what you've currently generated out to something like an HTTP response?
So the question is, do you always have to do a save at the end versus just stream it in?
Yeah.
So right now it is, you have to explicitly call out a save, but I would be interested to know your scenario in terms of just streaming without calling a save.
Well, basically I want to generate documents or spreadsheets for people on request where I don't want to necessarily store the resulting document in between, because there may be sort of 100 people looking to just pull it off from a query or something back to their own desktop as a docm or Excel or so on.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think right now, in terms of being able to just stream it in directly, you could create a file stream. So right now, what I did in my thing is I just opened up files through the system, but you can actually work within streams themselves.
Okay, so it will work then.
Yeah, it will work. So I didn't understand your question in the beginning. Any other questions? I don't have any more hats though.
One quick question. My customers typically like to see things in PDF when they print things, or possibly XPS.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that's not included right now, like converting to XPS. Is that a thought maybe in the future SDKs?
Yeah, so the question is, right now the SDK does not provide functionality to convert to PDF or XPS. What are the thoughts in terms of the SDK providing that functionality? Yeah, we've heard a lot of customers asking for that particular request. This is something that we're looking into in terms of scenarios. It's just at this point, it's just out of scope for what we're doing right now.
People are not going to install Word on the client.
There are third parties, yes. So the one gentleman over here mentioned there are third parties that do that. So you could imagine you can integrate those third party solutions with the SDK.
Do you know of any? Because I searched. Which one? X-Forms?
Is that specifically for XPS?
XPS, PDF, all that.
Is that, can it run on the
There was a couple of them.
server side?
Already.
Okay, great.
There were a couple of them that were in the exhibit.
Click on
automation. Yeah, you can do that yourself actually, but now you're back with Word on the server. And, you know.
Exactly.
Anyone else have any questions?
One short question. You said that is it possible to get the file as a stream and not save it to disk? For instance, if I want to save it to an isolated file storage in
Yeah, so the question there is it possible to not just manipulate files instead of using just a stream? And that was the same question the other gentleman asked, which is streams are possible. Yep. And just one more question.
Sure.
Anyone? No? All right. Well, thank you very much.